what were you most unprepared for when you first started?
The questions kids would ask, especially middle schoolers, they're not shy, and say that they would ask me stories about when I was a little kid. They would ask me stories about my wife. They would ask me anything to get me off topic. I see an interest spark somewhere, and I shift the whole lesson towards a student's interest. Students are a great gauge of their interest, especially middle school. They don't have a lot of tact. So if they're bored, they will let you know. The best indicator for me is if a bunch of kids start asking to go to the bathroom, that's usually the sign that I'm boring and they're trying to get out of class. Sometimes they're middle schoolers, and sometimes they say that I'm old, and they're like, what? Google wasn't around when you were a kid? No, I didn't have Google.
Another thing that I found very interesting, Josh, is that you seem to have a focus on creating rituals.
Every year, there's always one or two things that pop up. For example, for some reason, they squishy toys that they had. And one person threw one on my ceiling and it stuck. And I was like, okay, I can be really annoyed that they threw this at the ceiling, or let's just go with it. And so then I started throwing a bunch of them. Anytime one of them brought one in, I would throw it up on my ceiling. And so I had a whole ceiling covered with all these little sticky toys.
I would have loved to have had you as my middle school teacher. Please welcome Josh Stock, an award-winning middle school educator and innovation leader from Olathe, Kansas. Josh's dynamic approach to literacy and technology is inspiring educators and students alike. In 2016, Josh was named one of the National School Board Association's 22 Watch Educational Technology Leaders. And in 2017, Josh received the prestigious Make It Happen Award from the International Society for Technology in Education. The following year, the society again honored him with its Emerging Young Educator Award. Josh's accolades also include Emporia State University's Outstanding Recent Graduate Award and the Olathe School District's Mindshift Award for Excellence in Language Arts. As the author of Awesome Sauce and a frequent contributor to Edutopia and EdTech magazine, Josh champions project-based learning and tech-enhanced literacy. In this episode of the Inference show, we'll dive into how Josh's award-winning work at the intersection of literacy, creativity, and technology is reshaping what middle school education can and should look like in this ever-changing digital age. Josh, welcome to the Inference show.
Thanks for having me. I'm excited to be here.
Josh, I'll be honest, we talk to a lot of educators, but that's an impressive resume. So many awards. That talks a lot about your career and the impact that it's had. So congratulations, first of all, on making that happen over a very long period of time.
Oh, you made me sound a lot better than I really am. I'm just all right.
No, Josh, not at all. Awesome. Great to have you, Josh. Josh, we have a lot to talk about, but let's start with your journey. Where did you grow up?
So I've actually grown up all around the Kansas City area. So I've lived here my whole life. I went to middle school, elementary, high school, all in this area. And so I've kind of grew up here, and then I decided I wanted to teach in the same area I grew up in. And so I've been here all my life.
Awesome. And were your parents educators too?
So my mom is currently a special education teacher. She actually teaches in the same building that I do. And then my dad taught college classes towards the end of his career. He taught a lot of college classes and at like technical schools. And then my wife is also a fifth grade teacher. And then my daughter is in high school, but she wants to be a teacher someday down the road. So we've got a whole family of teachers.
Awesome, Josh. So growing up, was that a consistent conversation in the household, or the students did that, or this happened, or did you grow up in that environment?
So it really wasn't. My mom actually stayed home and raised us. She didn't get into education. She got her degree before I was born. And then when I was born, she decided to pause her career for a little bit, raise the kids, and then went back into education when I was in high school. But all through elementary school, I always had teachers who were encouraging me to work with the younger kids. And so I would be the one when I was in like 5th and 6th grade that they would send down to work with 1st and 2nd graders. I would sit and read with them or help out in the classroom. And I don't know if it's just that the teacher saw in me that I had this good way of making connections with kids, or if they were just looking for something else for me to do. But they were constantly having me work with younger kids. And I discovered that I was good at making those connections and I enjoyed it. And as I got older, I realized, oh, I could make a career out of this. And then I saw my mom go back to school and get her master's degree so that she could go back to teaching. And it's like, you know what, maybe that's something I want to pursue as well. So that's what I did.
That's cool. So I think you're one of the youngest teaching assistants I've met at grade 5. So that's awesome. You seem to always had a knack for teaching or interest
Yes.
in teaching. And then in high school, you realized that you wanted to be a teacher full time, and then that's what you pursued in college?
Yep. I knew what I wanted to do. And then thankfully, Emporia State is about an hour and a half from here, and they have a great teaching college. And so I knew I wanted to go there and get my degree in education. And I never really, I hear a lot of people saying that they wavered back and forth on what career they wanted, but I always really knew I wanted to be a teacher. I either wanted to be a teacher or be a writer, and now I get to teach kids how to write. So I got to combine both of them together.
Awesome. And then you got your bachelor's in education there, and then you got your master's in instructional design right after?
Yep. Everyone told me when I started teaching that I should take a year to just get settled. And I said, no, I don't want to put it off. So I went right into getting my master's degree, also from Emporia. I liked getting the technology piece because so much of my education was in the reading and writing world as an English teacher. I liked that balance. And so I went back and got my master's in instructional design and technology so I could find ways to merge those two things together. And that kind of pushed me forward after I got my master's degree, just to constantly try to find new and innovative ways to bring technology into the classroom. And also it kind of, if something didn't seem exciting enough, I found ways to spice it up with some of those technology pieces.
Awesome, Josh. And then right after your master's, you started teaching?
So I was getting my master's while I was teaching. And so actually my very first year of teaching, my daughter was born, we bought a new house, and I started my master's degree and I started teaching all in the same year. So it was a very hectic first year of teaching. But what was nice about it is that was super hectic. So it got better from there. it slowed down eventually as I went on. And I don't know, I always feel like I need to be moving and doing something new and something different. And so that's kind of always been my philosophy, is I've just gone from project to project to project. So as soon as I got my master's degree, I started doing some consultant work with KU. They reached out to the school and said, hey, we want some teachers to do some consulting for us. So I worked with Amber Rowland at Kansas University, and she brought me on to some projects. And so I'm constantly trying to find new things to get involved with, and then find ways to use that to enhance my own classroom.
Awesome. Josh, we'll talk a lot about the technology pieces soon. So the first year was really, really hectic. How was the classroom? Were you able to manage the kids, and was teaching what you thought it would be?
Teaching was harder than I thought it was going to be. I knew it was going to be difficult, but that first year, it's very eye-opening. There's a lot of things they can't prepare you for in your teaching programs. And so you learn to adapt. And that's what I've learned as a teacher over the years, is every year I learn new ways to adapt to unique situations. And now I've got strategies in my back pocket that if that doesn't work, I can try this other thing. So that first year, it was a lot of learning and a lot of realizing I didn't know everything. And so I had to lean on fellow teachers. I had an instructional coach that I leaned on just to find ways to manage that. But I also had a great group of kids. I taught 7th, 8th, and 9th grade reading for kids who were struggling in the reading classroom. And so it was to help boost them and give them that support. And I really liked that was my foundation at the beginning, was seeing students who are struggling and finding tools to help them. Now I teach in a general language arts classroom, but I have a lot of students who struggle. And so I've got that foundation that I started with, and that has really played out throughout the rest of my career. I've got those tools that I learned early on.
What were you most unprepared for when you first started?
The questions kids would ask, especially middle schoolers, they're not shy, and they will ask the most off the wall questions, especially if they know I'm really bad about going off on tangents. And say that they would ask me stories about when I was a little kid. They would ask me stories about my wife. They would ask me anything to get me off topic. And I was just not prepared for how many random questions they were going to ask me. And I had to learn creative ways to deflect questions. I'm like, okay, we're going to have to answer that later. We have some reading to do.
I see. So in the beginning, did you try to answer them all?
I tried to answer as many as I could.
And then you got it that that's not going to work out.
Yeah.
Awesome. So year one, very, very hectic. And Josh, how many years has it been now that you've been teaching?
I'm getting ready to start my 18th year. I've been in middle school all 18 years. I have taught 6th, 7th, 8th, and 9th grade. 6th grade has kind of been my sweet spot. I like the transition from elementary school to middle school. So 6th grade here is at the middle school level. And so we're that first taste of middle school. And so there's a lot of not just teaching classwork, but also how do you be a student? How do you use a planner? Teaching kids how to advocate for themselves, things like that they're not necessarily used to. And so I've loved that piece of it. But I've taught pretty much everything reading related at the middle school level.
And you've been at the same school since you started?
Same school. We just got a new building last year, but yeah, I've been at the same school for 18 years.
Awesome, Josh. That's a long time. And how were years 2, 3, 4? And tell us more. What happened in the following years early on?
I feel like every year I got a little bit more comfortable. I think that was the biggest change is I started learning how to handle different situations. And then looking back and thinking, oh, I should have handled that a little bit differently. Those early years, I was doing the reading class to help support struggling readers. And then I I taught 9th grade for 1 year, a couple of 9th grade classes. That was fun. Every year I've kind of had a different mix of classes because I've also mixed in I taught newspaper for a while, and that was fun, getting that variety. I taught leadership class. I taught different types of literacy classes. And I like that. I get bored if I do the same thing for too long. And so every couple of years, I get a new selection of classes that I'm teaching. And so that kind of keeps it fresh and keeps me, innovative and trying new things. And so over the years, each year, I kind of have had a different structure to my schedule, but it's nice because it keeps things new.
Josh, you call yourself an awesomeness expert. Please tell us more. What does that mean?
So, when I received the award from the Emerging Leaders Award from ISTE, they sent me a little form to fill out that said, what is your name and your title and where do you teach? And so I gave them that information. And at the bottom, I put awesomeness expert just to see if they would put it on my plaque. And they did. I got there and I had a plaque. So I have a plaque that says I am officially an awesomeness expert. But for me, that's more just trying to find unique ways to make the classroom fun and inviting and exciting every single day. Some days I'm not as good at it as others, but that's kind of what teaching is. You're just constantly evolving and trying new things. And I think that's what I hope makes me an awesomeness expert.
Oh, we can see that awesomeness over here, Josh, for sure. When did you realize that your goal was to be an awesomeness expert? When did you start to apply some of the principles like technology, instructional design? Because you put in a lot of effort and planning to actually not just claim, to be an awesomeness expert, right? So when did that evolution start, Josh?
It started early on. Actually, when I was a kid, I used to play around with technology all the time. Before my dad was teaching college classes, he worked at a lot of different tech companies. And so I kind of had that background of wanting to teach, but also I had always had technology around my house. And once I started realizing that I could combine the two things that I was really interested in, that really clicked with me. And that's what made me excited sometimes. If I was struggling with a lesson, I was like, what is something that would excite me? Because I knew that I could translate that to my students. And so early on, it was just finding new tools. Back then, it was back when podcasting was first starting to get big. It was blogging was getting really big. And I was seeing all these tools that allowed people to have a voice outside of just writing an essay. And I was thinking, wow, that's a great way to empower students. And so as I started realizing there were all these different ways to give students a means to express themselves, I realized, okay, well, how can I bring that into my classroom and make sure that all the students feel like they've got something to say, and then they've got the means to actually say what they want to say.
So quite early on, you had that foundation and a thought of using technology. How did it first start? Did you ask them to write a blog, make a video? Tell us more of your initial experiments.
So a lot of it was trying different apps, trying different websites. I did have, for a while, I was having them do blogging. And before I even had them actually create a blog, they were writing in a document and we called it their blog, and they like decorated it around the outside of just like a regular document. But it was still, the idea was there. So it was experiment with things like that. There were also times when I was experimenting with, I did a lot of video projects where they would write a script. So I remember one of them we did was about exotic animals. And the question was, should exotic animals be owned as pets? And so then they did some research, and I was going to have them write a research essay. And then I thought, well, I could have them make a public service announcement talking about why people should or should not have exotic animals. And they loved it. But I was still getting that writing piece in there because they were having to write the script. They were still having that reading piece because they were doing the research that went into it. And I wasn't allowing them to use the tools until they actually did the writing piece first. So they had to show me a script before I would let them go and record.
How did the kids react to it?
They loved it because it didn't feel like what they were used to when it came to reading and writing. They also enjoyed it because sometimes, especially students who were struggling at the time, sometimes they didn't know how to get what they wanted to say out there. And so as I was starting to find these tools and having them write scripts, I also help bring in some tools like text to speech, where they could have it read to them, and then speech to text, where they could record themselves saying something and it would type it out for them. So once I started finding ways to bring those in, they realized, hey, that's not going to stop me from saying what I want to say. And they were so excited to actually get what they wanted to say out there. And especially when the bigger a deal I made out of something, the more important it was to them. So when we did the videos, we would have a big watch party where we would watch all the videos, and they would laugh because some of them were silly. Some of them were over the top, had the sad music playing in the background and the sad pictures of tigers in cages, things like that. But they loved seeing other people's work too. And I think that was empowering for me. And I learned a lot from that experience. Is not only did they like this new way of creating, but they also loved that someone else was seeing it and they had an audience. And I think that was a big shift for me.
So you got them excited, right?
Yes.
You have infectious energy, Josh. I've been smiling ever since I've been talking to you the last few minutes. So your energy is very infectious. So and I think there's a design behind this. How do you get kids excited, and so excited that they're willing to do all what you ask them, which may or may not come naturally to them, right?
I think kids are naturally excited. I just think that the tasks we put in front of them aren't always, they kind of shut it down. And so they don't have the right task in front of them to help them keep that excitement going. It's sad because I see kids, I'm fortunate in sixth grade, they're still excited. They want to learn, they want to try new stuff. Sometimes I have to be a little bit more upbeat to get them going if it's something like grammar that they're not super thrilled about. But I think kids generally have this excitement, but they don't necessarily, it doesn't always come out. And I just have to find ways to tap into that and find things that they're going to do that are going to make them say, oh, I want to do that. And a lot of that's adjusting on the fly where I see an interest spark somewhere and I shift the whole lesson towards a student's interest. Students are a great gauge of their interest, especially middle school. They don't have a lot of tact. So if they're bored, they will let you know. The best indicator for me is if a bunch of kids start asking to go to the bathroom. That's usually the sign that I'm boring and they're trying to get out of class.
Awesome. That seems to be something that happens when they become adults as well. I think so. Awesome, Josh. I heard of two concepts that you're using. One is storytelling, right? You get them to tell a story, and second is they love an audience. Tell us about both, right? Tell us about storytelling, and you seem to be. It seems to be central to your approach, right? Because you asked them to write a blog, they have a story or a video. Tell us more.
So I think that storytelling has so many different applications. And a lot of times kids don't realize that they know how to write a story. They know how to tell something personal to them. Sometimes it takes a little bit of work to get them vulnerable enough to actually share that story or say that thing that they really want to say. But I try to give them opportunities as much as possible to tell that story and again, give them the tools to access that. So a lot of times it's the technical stuff that gets in the way of that storytelling. A lot of times it's the grammar or the spelling. And so kids will avoid difficult words because they don't know how to pronounce it or they don't know how to spell it. And so I try to give them those tools so that that's not the thing that's going to limit them. And once they realize that I can get my ideas out there, then they can start to apply it. So we always do a personal narrative first because I want them to tell their story. And a lot of times they say, well, I don't really have a story to tell. Nothing exciting has happened to me. And so we break it down to some of the simple moments that on the outside don't look like a big event. And I teach them how to expand that out and show all the underlying things that went into that story. And once they realize they can do that, then I teach them how to apply that to informational writing, how to apply it to argumentative writing, because I think storytelling is universal. I can explain a lot more if I tell a story than I can if I try to just explain things. People can make those personal connections, and I want the kids to be able to do that too.
Yeah, stories have this interesting aspect. It seems there's a lot of work that is going on recently as to why people relate to stories. It seems to be something that's baked into our DNA. We love stories, people do, and it seems that at a very early age we have the ability to tell a lot of stories, and it captivates people, right?
It's interesting too that sometimes my students may not sit for a 15-minute lesson from me if I'm just talking, but if I'm weaving in a story, especially if it's a story about from when I was a kid, they love hearing about when I was a kid. But if I can find a way to tell that story, it hooks their attention and they can connect to it. And then they have something to stick that new knowledge to. They can kind of process it in their brain and it kind of locks it in a little bit better when they can connect to that story that I told.
By telling stories of your childhood, Josh, you make them very relatable, right? And similar.
Absolutely. And they also sometimes they're middle schoolers and sometimes they say that I'm old and they're like, what? Google wasn't around when you were a kid? No, I didn't have Google. But it definitely makes those connections with them, especially. So we do a couple of different activities where one of them is they draw a map of their house and just write examples of stories all around the house. And they love to hear my injury stories because then that prompts a story from them when they broke their arm or they stubbed their toe or whatever it is. They love to connect over pain.
Josh. So, Josh, growing up, you were very interested in technology. Coming in, you saw this opportunity and you started to apply all these really interesting things. Started with documents, then blogs, and then videos, and perhaps started with an idea, and then you realized, wow, this really works. When did that happen? Wow, that this I'm onto something. When did you realize that?
I don't think it was a specific thing. I think it was I had more hits than misses because when you're a teacher, you've got, some lessons just click and some lessons don't. And the ones that I incorporated these technology pieces, the amount of buy-in I got from the students and the amount of work the students were willing to put in and the amount of difficult things they were willing to do because they had this extra tool that was building that excitement for them. I think that's what really did it is when I saw that kids were investing more into it because of the tools I was pulling.
All right, Josh. And what about the educators around you and the school administrators? Did they buy into it right away? Did you feel resistant? Did you feel very supported? How did that go?
I have been fortunate. All of my administrators have always had the philosophy of, I will support 100% whatever you're doing, as long as it's what's best for kids. And sometimes they would ask me, they would say, okay, what is the purpose behind, this activity? And because I was always able to give them an answer and connect it back to the goals and the standards that we were learning, they realized, oh yeah, you're doing exactly what you should be doing. This is great for kids. My colleagues, one thing that I like about the school that I work at is I have some teachers who are super tech heavy in their classrooms, and then I have some that aren't. And I think kids need that balance. I think that it's nice that not everyone is focusing so much on the technology pieces. I think that kids need throughout their day opportunities. And even myself, I've tried to slow down and not have technology be every aspect of every class of every day. I try to find ways to, when I use it, there's a purpose for it. And there's some reason that that tool is going to be better than, paper pencil or an actual book. And so I try to find that balance, but I'm fortunate. I work with a great group of educators and a great admin team, and they've always been super supportive of all of that. So.
Yeah, it takes a team to be successful. So it seems you've been very well supported. Tell us a little bit more about Olathe and the area you're in. What are the demographics? What kind of people are there? It's definitely not a rural community, and it seems to be a pretty wealthy community as well if you look at data. But tell us more, or is there a mix? Yeah.
So it's depends on the where you're at in Olathe. We have, I think, 32 elementary schools, 10 middle schools, 5 high schools, and it's very, very diverse. My school in particular, we have about 50% of our students get free and reduced lunch. We have one of the homeless shelters feeds into some of their students come to our school. We have a lot of pockets of poverty in our area. And then we also have some middle-class families. We have a wide range of students who attend here. This year was my first year having a former student's kid, and that was weird for me. But I feel like I've been a part of this community for so long that I've developed a lot of connections with the families around here, and the families care deeply about their kids.
Understood. Josh, I didn't realize that Olathe, the district was so big, but it seems to be very big and diverse. Obviously, it's, Kansas City is one of the largest metropolitan areas in our country. Um, Thanks for educating me about that. Your approach to storytelling, when they get to create a story and tell it loud, and you said that you make them hear their own voice loud, and that makes them more confident. Does it help them create more agency in their own decisions? And tell us more, or is that one of your goals, to create agency?
That's absolutely one of my goals, especially with them being 6th graders. So they're transitioning from elementary school, where a lot of it's even just communication is very parent focused. Parent communicates with teacher, teacher communicates with parent. We try to teach them how to ask teachers questions. How do I email a teacher about an assignment I'm missing? How do I have these conversations that are going to help them in the outside world once they leave school. And so I'm constantly trying to find ways to show them that. And so that storytelling element and that ability to share what they know is kind of that first step. And we're building in all of these opportunities for them to hopefully by the time they leave middle school, they are self-sufficient. I even tell parents, I tell them, I know you want to email on behalf of your kid. I tell them, you send me an email and then help your kid write that email. I understand that the kid's email may not be perfect and it may not say exactly what they want to say, but just have the kids get that practice doing that piece. And then, parents still communicate with me as well. And so it's building in those safeguards because there's no safer place to try those things out than right here. I'd rather them try, sending an email and having a goofy tagline at the end so I can have that conversation instead of their employer, or they're going for a job interview and they say something like that. I can have that conversation with them now.
You get a lot of funny emails, George.
I've had so many funny emails. I always have the kids write an email to me first at the beginning of the year, and I always allow them to ask one question in their email, and the questions they ask are unique, and some of them are, I'm not sure what they're asking, but it's great. That's why I work in middle school. It is so much fun, and every day is different.
Do you remember any particular question or a common question you get asked?
They want to know about my wife a lot. They want to know so my son is actually a 7th grader at the school I teach at. They want to know if he gets embarrassed of me, and I tell them yes, I embarrass him all the time. That's what they really want to know the most about. Is they get really nosy. That they'll ask me things like, so who did you take to your junior prom? I'm like, wow, that's way back, but okay.
So, another thing that I found very interesting, Josh, is that you seem to have a focus on creating rituals, right? And rituals seem to have this, an associated comfort with them. I suddenly remembered going to Trader Joe's, close by, and they ring the bell when something happens, right?
Yep.
And sometimes I feel like I enjoyed hearing that bell in that grocery store, right? For no reason, right? That seems to be a ritual. It just seems to be something very fundamental with people and kids or younger adults and older people that they relate to rituals. How did it come to be?
So some of them occur organically. Like every year there's always one or two things that pop up that becomes a ritual, and I didn't even realize it until we started doing it. And then once I realized the kids were latched onto it, it'll stick, and I'll make sure to use it more. For example, for some reason they had these little squishy toys that they had, and one person threw one on my ceiling and it stuck. And I was like, okay, I can be really annoyed that they threw this at the ceiling, or let's just go with it. And so then I started throwing a bunch of them. Anytime one of them brought one in, I would throw it up on my ceiling. And so I had a whole ceiling covered with all these little sticky toys. But they would come in and look at it, and then they started naming all of them that were on my ceiling. But that was organic. That just happened because I saw an opportunity and I ran with it. Some of them are more designed. For example, when my kids walk into my room, before they walk in, there's a sign on the door where they hit the sign, and the sign has, how do you want to be greeted today? It's, do you want a high five, fist bump, hug, a wave? Or like at the bottom, it's one of them's leave me alone, meaning I want some space. And I tell them, it's okay. If you need space today, just tell me that. And it gives me good information when they come into the room, how they're feeling. And then there's one, I have a question, so that then they can ask me the question before class starts. And that is how they start the day. That's how they start the hour with me. And that routine, if I miss it, they let me know. They're disappointed if I'm not out there to get their fist bump. Sometimes they get creative handshakes. It varies from year to year. But a lot of it is just those, a mixture of the planned moments and the organic ones. just kind of rolling with it. And if I see something clicking, I make it a tradition.
Understood. Very interesting, Josh. Um, Josh, let's switch gears a little bit. You've obviously created an awesome classroom environment. You know, I would have loved to had you as my middle school teacher. So, that is awesome. But, there's something very fundamentally different about your classroom, the emphasis on using technology and how you've combined both of those things. And you seem to have used a lot of different things. Like you talked about blogging, you talked about videos, you seem to have used others like virtual reality, podcasting, robotics, all kinds of things. Tell us a little bit more about the kind of things that you've tried and your experience there.
So I try to expose the students to a lot of different things that I think they might experience after school. And so that's why I try to bring in things like podcasting. I've really enjoyed both having kids create podcasts. And then there are a few podcasts that are made for kids that kids can listen to, but especially just the creation piece of that. I have had the kids create with the VR. I teach a lot of summer camps, and with the VR, they got to create their own custom space. And again, VR is a tool that they're going to see outside in the future, and so I'm constantly trying to find ways to expose them to that augmented reality. I've had them. There are these cubes that you can program to do different things on the different sides of the AR cube. So I brought that in. I do a lot of not just technology, but lots of Legos, lots of Play-Doh. So when they're creating videos, I like to have lots of props for them to use, little figurines, little anything that can help tell the story that they're wanting to tell. And so it's just, I see something online, I'm like, oh, that looks cool. How can I use this? And I have to be able to justify it to myself first. I think that's the biggest part. Is a lot of times I see a cool tool or a cool lesson, but if I can't find a way to use it effectively, if I'm going to spend more time teaching the technology than I am on the actual lesson I want to teach them, then I have to set it aside until I come up with something better to use it for.
Awesome, Josh. So over the 18 years now, your 18th year this year, a lot has changed, right?
Yeah. Oh, yeah.
In technology and the students themselves, right? 18 years ago, they were very different when it came to technology and early exposure to technology and so forth. How has the student changed and how do they interact with technology today while technology is changing itself?
They've had to adapt a lot more because not only is what I'm doing, different, but it's constantly changing. They're constantly, new technologies are coming out and they're coming out quicker. Every year there's something new. And so they are very good at adapting. However, I have seen their attention span is getting shorter and shorter. And so as a teacher, I'm having to adjust the way I present information to kids. So I may present in smaller chunks what I might have put in one big chunk of information. I'm presenting it in smaller ways. However, their ability to adapt and solve technology problems on their own has improved. So it's been a little bit of a trade-off.
I see. So attention goes down, but their ability to use technology goes up.
Yes.
And that's the trade-off you're balancing against. Now, there's so much happening in tech, Josh, and we know that you write a lot. So you write for the EdTech magazine, and we'll add some of the links to your articles in this, the podcast description, so that folks can follow you there. How do you decide which ones, in terms of technology, which ones are actually good and worthy, and how should a teacher, pick the right ones? What are your guiding principles in choosing technology?
I like to make sure that it's going to be worth the effort, because if it's a new technology, I know I'm going to have some teaching of the tool first before I teach them the lesson with writing or reading. And so I have to decide if the amount of time I'm going to take to teach the tool is going to balance out the amount of impact it's going to have. And I also look at tools that does it have more applications than just the one thing that I'm doing that day. Because if I teach them how to use a podcasting tool, well, they can do that in a lot of different classes. They can do podcasting on their own. There's a lot of things they can do with that. Whereas if it's just a one-off activity that they're going to do, that they can't use it for anything else, it's not always going to be worth my time. I also look for what are the tools that have the best accessibility features to it, which one is going to be the most user-friendly, and most importantly, which one can I have the kids access without the headaches of passwords and usernames. A lot of the tools have, if they can sign in with their Google account, I love it. But if they don't, that's just one more layer that I need to work in. So it's just deciding if all the work that's going to go into teaching them that tool, if that's going to have a meaningful impact on them and it's going to help them tell their story, absolutely. I want to run with that.
So just a simple thing like having them log in with Google or using a login password makes a tremendous impact on the usability.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, that can take, 15 minutes of a lesson. If it's not easy for them to get into it, that can take 15 minutes of a lesson that I don't have time to, give up that time. I'm willing to give up time for a lot of creative things, but troubleshooting passwords is my least favorite part of my job.
Understood. Josh, there's so much happening in technology today. What are you most excited about in that space? And you have, such deep experience. You have a master's in instructional design and technology. Tell us a little bit more on, what excites you today.
I think I'm the most excited for AI tools, and especially not necessarily the AI itself, which I think is great, but tools that are using AI in creative ways to help make students, the things that they're struggling with, help add that accessibility feature to it. So like if a student is struggling to generate ideas for an essay, a tool that helps them do that, I'm excited about that. There are some great AI tools right now out there. There's School AI, Magic School. Those are just a couple of them that have AI tools that will help a student. Right now, I'm trying to balance the amount of support they're getting from AI and actually make it beneficial. But I think that there are so many ways that limitations, things that would have limited kids in the past from expressing themselves the way they want to, whether it's creating a video. There are so many video tools now that they can help the kids get their ideas out there. And in the past, there was such a hurdle and such a learning curve with any one of these tools that it was almost impossible. But now they all have features that, you type in your description of what you want this picture to look like that you're going to put in your blog. I want polar bears battling penguins in the Arctic with sunglasses on, and it's going to create that picture for them. And I think that it's going to enhance what the kids are wanting to say.
Awesome. So you feel that, AI in the specific implementation that you like helps kids, helps them give a voice.
Yeah.
Understood. And Josh, tell us a little bit more on, where these tools are different from something like ChatGPT.
So a lot of them, it's more about the limitations that you can put in place. So for example, I can create a chatbot that will help students generate ideas, but it won't write, like I can tell it only give responses that are, 15 words or less. So it's not going to write an essay for them, but a student could say, can you read this sentence and tell me how to make it sound better? And it will do that. And I think that's the biggest difference, because the students don't necessarily know how to. I think sometimes when students are so-called cheating with AI, I think sometimes they don't even realize that they're getting as much help from the AI as they are. And I think that those tools help guide them to get the support they need without it actually like doing the work for them.
Cheating and what is cheating and what is not, is a debate amongst adults and educators, right? How do you expect a, fifth or a sixth grader to know that, right? There's a question of policy, there's a question of ethics, there's a question of experience, right? Adults get confused on what is cheating and people debate that to death, right? And how do you expect
Right.
a sixth grader to know that, right? How could
Well,
you?
even with my own writing, I'm like, I sometimes I'll put something into ChatGPT and say, "Hey, this paragraph sounds weird," and it'll give me a revised paragraph, and then I have to ask myself, "Okay, so how much of that is still mine? Is this my writing, or is this the AI's writing?" It's. I think that's something that people are going to have to wrestle with for a long time until we really come up with some answers of where that line is going to be.
Understood. In terms of the tools that kids are using then and the ones that you like and recommend are the ones that are guiding them or helping them come up with the answer, but actually tightly control the answer itself, right? It's
Yeah.
behind a thought process and behind what they need to do to get it done. Is that the right way to think about these tools, Josh?
Yes, and I like tools that will ask questions versus giving answers. So it'll say, "Well, have you thought about it from this angle?" Or have you thought, and get the kids to think and come up with answers on their own through questioning. Because that's what I would do if I was sitting next to the kid, is I would help them by asking them questions about what they're trying to get to. And I think that the tools that can help them in that way and ask the right questions, those are the ones that have really helped the kids. I'm also excited for AI just personally as a teacher. On my end, it's a huge time saver because I am able to, I generate 10 simile examples in about 10 seconds. Whereas in the past, I was constantly trying to think of examples. And, if a kid didn't understand something, okay, well, I would ask it, okay, how can I explain this to the student? This is what they're struggling with. And it would give me new perspectives to look at a problem.
You said something very interesting, that it limits the answer to 15 words. So, that really helps, and there are many, many ways of drawing lines that way, right? What are some of the approaches that work and where does it break down?
I think a lot of it is having these authentic discussions with kids. And anytime I've had something like this where I'm like, I honestly don't have the right answer or unanswer of where that line is, but I like having these conversations with the students because I think when you bring them into that space and tell them that their opinion on this matters, that's in fact, now that we're talking about it, I'm thinking this is something I want to bring up with my students and show them an example where it started and where it ended and what the AI said along the way. I think that's a powerful discussion to have with the kids because I think they'll see how nuanced that is. But I want them to see, hey, do you see how this was one sentence and now you've got a full paragraph? Do you think that is that student's work? I think kids can make those, they can get to the right answer if you can guide them there. And I think the more we have these authentic discussions with kids about the dangers of it, I know a lot of teachers are afraid to have the discussions because they're like, you know what, if I show the kids how this tool could help them cheat, they're going to cheat. But I think that the kids need to have the opportunity to see for themselves why it's a problem. Because if I tell them not to do something, they're going to want to do it. But if they can see the impact of it and see how it's not really their writing, I think a lot of them will realize, oh, you know what? I need to limit the ways that I'm using this tool. And so it's a lot of having those discussions with kids. But I don't have a good answer for where that line is. And that's even something our district is wrestling with right now is what policies can we put in place that won't infringe on the power of these tools while still keeping the kids' work authentic and keeping it their work and their ideas. So it's a tough balance.
A lot of people are asking that question, wrestling with that, Josh. But I think you gave some very interesting perspectives on or examples of lines that can be drawn. I think that's very powerful. Josh, let's switch gears a little bit and talk about AI usage for you as a teacher. So you said that the generative AI aspects really help you. Give us a few more examples of how you're using it and what do you find interesting.
Oh my gosh, there are so many applications. So just today, my wife and I were talking about we do daily slides, and that's a tedious task. It's not a lot of thought that goes into that task, but creating a slide for every day of the school year is a pain. However, in Canva, we were able to create in about 10 minutes all the slides for the entire year with like the date on it and the day of the week. And it had we used Canva to create the slides. And then we went to Gemini and asked for, give me 180 facts of the day. They can be about anything. And then we put it all into Canva and it just generated all of our slides. Put the data on there for us, all this tedious work. And I think that's where AI is the most powerful right now, is all those little tedious things that get in the way of coming up with these creative ideas are where the best uses are going to be. The ones that are going to save teachers time so they can spend more effort on the important stuff.
That makes a lot of sense, Josh. And Josh, where does AI break down? Where does it not work for you as a teacher?
I think the biggest thing, I heard it described this way once, is that AI does 80% of the work and then the teacher has to do the other 20%. It's going in and making sure that everything that the AI gives as an example aligns with what I want to be teaching my students. Or is it using examples that, are a high school level that kids aren't going to understand it? So it's going in and double checking the AI's work. So it's more like getting a rough draft from AI and then I finalize it. I make sure that it's publishable. I'm the editor. I'm going in and tweaking all the little pieces, but it saves me so much time because I can tweak it and make it look exactly like what I want my students to see or the content I want to be delivered to my students. But if I'm only having to do that piece, it saves me a lot of time to spend doing more personalized lessons, or I can get more nuanced with the way I want to help certain students accomplish their goals. I can do that. It frees me up to do that instead of, spending an hour creating a slide deck that, takes me a minute with AI's help.
Understood, Josh. Very interesting. Thank you for your perspectives on technology, Josh. Josh, over the years, you've done some really awesome work. You've been recognized nationally for your work in education, from ISTE to the National School Boards Association. What does that recognition mean to you? And, how is it shaping your work moving forward?
I am honored to receive those accolades, to receive those recognitions. But I also know that there are a lot of educators who are doing incredible things out there that don't always get those recognitions. And I think that while I'm honored and I love the opportunity, I love spotlighting great things that teachers are doing. And I feel honored to have that recognition. I also know there are some incredible teachers out there that don't get the recognition they deserve. And so, my recognitions are based on all the teachers that I work with that have supported me and poured into my classroom and invested their time and energy into me to help me be a successful teacher. And I think that a lot of times with those awards and accolades, people look at them and say, oh my gosh, that person did that incredible thing. Well, there were a lot of people that were a part of that helped get me to that place. And so I'm honored, and it's a privilege to be able to do that. The one thing that it does give me the opportunity to do is to speak about education and encourage other teachers. And it's given me opportunities to have a platform and to be able to share out about great things that teachers are doing. So I love getting recognized, but I just hope that I can do it justice when I'm in my classroom.
Yeah, Josh, absolutely. You've done amazing work. Josh, what are the most critical challenges that teachers face today?
Oh, there are always challenges, and they're always different. I think that the biggest thing facing educators right now is just, because of, funding is a big challenge for teachers right now. And that is the biggest thing, to make sure that we are able to educate students to the fullest of our abilities, and making sure that we have all of those supports that we need in place for our students, whether it's the English language learner supports or the special education supports, or there's all these things that we need to do to help support our students, and making sure that we've got the ability to support our students to our best capacity. I'm fortunate. My biggest class size is like 26 students usually, and I'm fortunate. There are some classes that are a lot bigger than that, and I think that's what teachers are facing, is how do we teach students? It's not the students that we're struggling with. It's just making sure that we have all the supports that we possibly could to give the students the best opportunity to succeed. And teachers are magicians. They find ways to creatively solve all those problems. That's why we do what we do, because we'll do whatever we can for our students. But at the end of the day, there are limitations, and we've got to make sure that we've got everything that we can to help the student be successful.
Josh, it's been such a fascinating conversation. Your energy is infectious. I know I've said that multiple times now. Is there anything else you'd like to say to people who might be listening to the podcast?
No, I love getting the opportunity to talk about things happening in the classroom. And I also, like I said before, there are amazing things happening in classrooms across the country. And I'm just one teacher. I am fortunate. I go to a lot of conferences and things, and I love interacting with other teachers because they're doing incredible things. And the thing that I love about teachers is we also love to share. And so, we're constantly sharing resources or ideas, it's just this network of people who want what's best for kids and want kids to thrive when they leave. And I'm fortunate to be in that career with everyone else. So.
Awesome, Josh. Josh, it's been a pleasure talking to you. Folks, Josh is an award-winning middle school educator and innovation leader from Olathe, Kansas. Josh has demonstrated a dynamic approach to literacy and technology and has inspired educators and students alike in our country. Josh, thank you so much for all the work that you've put in. It was an awesome conversation and great talking to you.
Thank you for having me.